when we think about imagination, I like the way that that video ends with the clock just spinning. To try to imagine a concept like infinity seems to be quite impossible, doesn't it? You think you know what infinity is. It reminds me of the first time I saw the Grand Canyon. I had, and I said this before, I had the imagination. I thought I was really seeing across to the other side until I realized that this tiny little thing that looked like a shrub was actually a giant tree, like maybe 20 feet tall. So what was I really seeing? What was coming in? It's nice to imagine that we can do certain things. I think often, when was the last time you feel like you actively engaged in your imagination? I think this practice of qigong helps us to imagine until we can really feel. You know, the more Helen says, feel the energy. Just by the suggestion of it, you can imagine it, and all of a sudden it's really there because the brain works this way. I started thinking about imagination and how it's such a perfect part of childhood. We imagine things all the time. You would go out and, you'd have a little tent maybe made around a piece of furniture, or you would go outside and make a fort or pile up leaves, and that was your little fort, or snowballs, or you would play these extravagant things. One of my favorite things I used to imagine, and I really believe that it helped me get better at driving a stick shift car, was I was just always taken with the idea of school buses. I loved the school bus. I loved it. And I don't know why I loved it so much, because it was always so curious to see the same people day after day after day. You'd stop in front of their house and you'd see how different their house looked. But then you see the kid come out with whatever they were wearing. And mostly I was more interested in the face they were wearing, the energy around that friend, like what they were wearing. How are they today? Right? So the school bus for me was like a fascination. So I used to, when we had the weekend off, I would get an egg crate. It was a 12-seater school bus, as it turns out. And I would place little Lincoln logs. You remember those?
Yeah.
The little ones that would fit in my egg crate all around the living room. And I would drive the yellow egg crate. And I'd make the sound. And you'd hear, and you turn it, creak it. Ours was not a brand new school bus, but all the sights and sounds. I was in it. I was in the driver's seat of the school bus, picking up my friends, conversations, all this kind of stuff. But what was it for you? Think of the thing you used to play with like that, or be out on your swing set and pretend like you were flying, or any of these things. We're all smiling. Everyone in the room here is smiling right now. And I think that's part of the joy of our association with that word imagination. I'm not going to disrupt that. I'm just going to add another thought. Think of times when you use your imagination to create anxiety-producing things, or worry, or stories that are never going to happen, things that really aren't happening. For example, my mom would do this. Like if when we were growing up, if we weren't home, like right at the minute we were supposed to be home, any number of things could have been happening to us in her mind. I thought that, you'd fallen off on the side of the road and there was a ditch, or what, did you get a flat tire? Or this was like before things. She would worry. So how do we use our imaginations? Do you sometimes? Sometimes I do. Like if I'm texting with someone, texting with Helen, she's there 1 second and the next minute I'm not getting, it's like radio silence. She was just there a minute ago. Where are you? You were just there. You couldn't, like, do you do this? Yeah, you got ghosted by, somebody. What do you think next? Like, what could have happened, but where are they? What are they doing? And you imagine all sorts of different things. What if she was out walking the dog and that fox came back around? I better get in my car and drive up there and find it. No, but how far do you roll it out in your imagination with things that are going on? Or you don't feel well. And because of all of the stuff that we see on TV that tell us all these things that could be wrong with our body, you let your imagination, or sometimes we can let our imaginations run wild with the possibilities of, oh my God, this is it. Oh my God, or this could be. How do we arrest that? Stop it right before it starts and reprogram the neurological patterns in our mind to associate freely with positive things more consistently. That's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to harness the power of imagination to bring forth more joy, more calm, not even necessarily more wisdom or knowledge. So I'd like to invite you, to start with me. Imagine that I actually remembered my music stand this morning. See it? These pages are floating in space. You can't really see. So I'm going to start with a study that was done at Colorado University in their School of Medicine. And it says imagination and emotions. It turns out that when we imagine things, the brain attempts to simulate the responses that would occur if these situations actually happened. This is the same neural process that enables us to be empathetic, to put ourselves in someone else's shoes, and to understand their mental states. So I'm talking about looking at my friends getting onto the school bus. I was a little bit of an empath then. I'm a huge empath now. But just watching how they get on the school bus. Are their clothes disheveled? Like, what happened? Were they in a hurry? Are they still chewing food? What happened before they got up late? I'm imagining that I know what happened 5 minutes before. I don't know what happened, right? Yeah. Maybe there are any number of things, but our imagination likes to fill it in because that's what we do. We co-create. If you can get your idea that you are a immortal mortal, right? You co-create every second of your life, whether you're consciously doing it or unconsciously doing it. This is what we're going to talk about today. So we like to fill it in with a story. We love stories, right? Who loves a cliffhanger? I don't. I don't. We used to have to wait a whole week to resolve the cliffhanger. Now you can watch it like in the next episode and it's still annoying. Don't like the cliffhanger. Okay, so what happens to the brain during imagination? So this was my sequence of getting to the bottom or the top of it, getting to the middle of it, the point, right? So why is this possible? What happens to the imagination? Is an experimental partition of the mind used to develop theories and ideas based on functions, right? Taking objects from real perceptions, the imagination uses complex if functionings that involve both somatic and episodic memory to develop new or revised ideas. So when we see things happening, we take experiences we've already had, whether we've experienced them ourselves, like through an episode, one incident, this happened this time, I'll never go to that restaurant again because this is what happened. But then 10 of your friends say, oh my God, every time I go there, it's great. That was just, you should try it again. Did anyone ever tell you that? Yeah. Something you tried and just didn't have a good experience. Imagination might have preceded your experience by creating an expectation for you. You might have created with your imagination an expectation that this was going to be awesome. And you might have already played it through in your mind what the definition of that awesome in that instance was going to look like. You see how imagination can get ahead of you? Keeping yourself present in the moment helps this situation. So the takeaway that I just read about semantic and episodic memory, I was taken from the School of Medicine, as I said, in Colorado, Boulder. This research confirms that imagination is a neurological reality that can impact our brains and bodies in ways that matter for our well-being. So we can use imagination to affect our well-being. And because we can do that, that means the opposite is also true, isn't it? We can use it to keep ourselves crippled by an anxiety or by a fear or multiple ones. So let's practice today. And just the invitation for this morning is let's repurpose imagination and recognize when we're using it. Am I using it to create, I'm going to go and it's not going to be a good time? Yep, you're right. Right? Henry Ford, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. All right, so let's start thinking more and focusing more on what we would like to see without creating expectation, but imagine it and bring it to the surface of yourselves. There's some really fabulous work that was done by a gentleman in Canada, and I've talked about him before, Tor Noratrander, who wrote a book called The User Illusion. And it speaks to this specifically. We used to do it in our creativity workshops where you would Go back to a time in your life when you were feeling really, really good. Everything was just that perfect day. I mean, and I literally mean perfect this time, like everything was just, you know. And if you put it right in the prefrontal cortex region of your brain and close your eyes and tell it out loud to another person who also has their eyes closed in first person statements. I am standing on the beach and I can feel with as many sensations as possible. You are literally and figurative. You are recreating that experience in your brain and reliving it based on your experience. So you're using your imagination to recreate something that was actually an episode that really happened. But the body doesn't know the difference, is what this research is saying. The body doesn't know whether you're doing it right now, or like this person that was recounting a story actually felt mist on her face again from the ocean. And she was sitting there going like, oh my God, my face, it should be wet, feels wet. You know? So these wonderful experiences are alive inside of us, always. They never go away. And so we can use that to push out maybe a negative association that we had. For example, the way the study worked at University of Colorado, they got 68 healthy participants, were trained to associate a sound with an uncomfortable but not painful electric shock. They always use shock, these scientists. But how many of you have a person's voice who just the sound of their voice makes you go, come on, there's one or two. Everybody's nodding their heads in the room. Do you have? So we can help you reprogram. It's not always going to be negative. It might not always be. So as soon as you hear their voice, you don't have to, unless you're doing something wrong. Like when you were a little kid and you got cut, like you're doing something you're not supposed to be doing. All of a sudden you hear the voice of your, parent or guide person. And you get like, oh my God, put it away. Your sister would say, put it away, hurry up, put it under the bed. Yeah. So think about these things, like use your imagination, go backwards, be fluid. I chose the song Spiraling because I want you to be fluid with time right now. Let it all happen at once in your brain. Don't compartmentalize time with association. Just go to where it is and recognize that's where it always is. It doesn't exist inside of time. Memories exist outside of time. That's a whole talk for another time. But thank you. Yeah, you need to have drums, Dan. Okay. So back to the study, and I'll keep it in order so we can stick with it. 68 healthy participants were trained to associate a sound with an uncomfortable but not painful electric shock. Then they were divided into 3 groups and either exposed to the same threatening sound, or asked to play the sound in their head, or asked to imagine a pleasant bird and rain sound experience, all without experiencing further shocks. So first they set it up where everybody was exposed to a shock associated with an experience or an electric shock. And then they split them up into 3 groups. 2 of them were still trying to think of they were divided into 3 groups and either exposed to the same threatening sound without the shock, or asked to play the sound in the head without a shock, or asked to imagine pleasant bird and rain sounds instead. Everybody with me? Everybody shaking their head here. I hope you got this. If not, you can just rewind it later. What are you talking about? Ferrero, get with the program. The researchers then measured brain activity using functional magnetic rays imaging, the fMRIs. We all know those. Sensors on the skin measured how the body responded to this experiment. In the groups that imagined and heard the threatening sounds, brain activity was remarkably similar. So the 2 that were told to just keep imagining, one was listening to the actual sound with no shock, and the other was imagining they were hearing the sound with no shock. Those 2, they kind of look the same, which kind of sets up whether you're really hearing it or not. If you imagine it, it does the same thing in your brain, right? That's one part of this thing. After repeated exposure without the accompanying shock, the subjects in both the real and the imagined threat groups experienced what is known as extinction, where the formerly fear-inducing stimulus no longer ignited a fear response. Think about that for a minute. So first you're listening to something and you're getting a shock, then you're listening to it or imagining you're hearing it and you're not getting a shock. All of a sudden, the sensors were similar in that they weren't nervous anymore. The anxiety wasn't there. They could hear that sound without thinking something bad's going to happen. So it's called extinction. It just totally wiped out the association to when I hear this, oh my God. Oh, because then they got used to, well, that doesn't always mean that's what's going to happen. You see the transition. Essentially, the brain had learned, hold on. After repeated exposure without the accompanying shock, the subjects in both the real and imagined threat groups experienced what is known as extinction, where the formerly fear-inducing stimulus no longer ignited a fear response. Essentially, the brain had unlearned to be afraid. It learned to be afraid, and then it was like, I guess that's really not real because it only happened once. Now I'm getting more of an experience of this sound without anything negative. So it just unlearned to be afraid. Now here's the trick. Statistically, real and imagined exposure to the threat were not different at the whole brain level, and imagination worked just as well. This is the kicker here. Notably, the group that imagined bird and rain sounds, like the pleasant, the one that we're asked to now imagine something nice, imagine calm blue ocean, showed different brain reactions, and their fear response to the sound persisted. So the ones who were asked to think of something else, when this happens, don't think about that, think of this, never had the opportunity to experience the extinction of, that's not real, and it's not going to hurt me every single time. Instead, they tried to replace the negative thought and feeling with something positive. And in trying to just ride over it, it's still there. So I think about this. This is what in the spiritual world we call spiritual bypass. We just pretend it's not there and just think of something more pleasant to calm down, instead of really reprogramming the brain to think every single time I hear this sound, something bad is not going to happen. That was one instance. It doesn't mean indefinitely, right? You see how tricky this all can be? So how to repurpose and harness. I think a lot of people assume that the way to reduce fear and negative emotion, this doctor is saying, is to imagine something good. In fact, what might be more effective is exactly the opposite. Imagining the threat, but without the negative consequences. So you can imagine the thing. Let's say, how many times do you play something through in your head, something you probably could have said, would have said, should have said, or done? And when this person comes at me like that, instead of shrinking and hovering in the corner, I can imagine myself enormous and just saying, that's very interesting, excuse me. Or pass the gravy, like we say here, right? You don't have to engage. Like, oh my God, here we go. I'm going to go there and it's going to be a fight because they always imagine it differently. Imagine the same stimulation, they're probably still going to volley it into your court. Sports psychologists do this all the time. They watch football games, they watch basketball games, they watch what the plays were, and then they figure out how they're going to do it differently next time. They're going to try to run that play again. Oh, I recognize it, and I have a response to this incoming. I'm going to do it differently this time. And they practice it on the field, but they practice it mentally. You know, one of my high school coaches would not ever permit mental errors. Never. Physical error, you get a bad hop and a ball bounces over. You know, when we were playing softball, our fields were not beautiful like they are today. We played anywhere there was a flat surface and you could throw down some things. But the thing was a mental error. If something happens and you just start to get all in your head, no. You work that out. And you might miss one ball and, okay, that was a physical error. But if it gets in your head, like, I'm going to miss every ball from now on, oh my God, you're done. You might as well just get pulled right out of the game. You're not going to, if you think that's true, that's how you're going to play. And you'd have to go and work on that. She would just sit there. Then maybe the next day, it's like she would hit you 100 balls until you fielded every one of them. Like physically, mentally. So you can play it in your mind because the brain doesn't know the difference. It doesn't know if you're really doing it or imagining it. So that when this thing comes, you do something else. Performances. We imagine great performances. You imagine yourself, if you know where you're going to be, standing in the concert hall, giving a great performance. And a friend of mine taught me the power of 3 a long, long time ago. Like to use your imagination to create the experience you would most like to have and do it in 3s. I'm going to go to the concert hall. I'm going to give the performance of my life, and the crowd is going to go wild. And then feel what it feels like. Engage your feelings, every emotion you can possibly, every sense you can get into it. Feel that cheering, hear it, deafening. Standing ovation. I'm seeing people smiling and cheering. I'm dodging bouquets and money. Tomatoes. Think of it. So think of the thing that you have coming up that is meaningful to you. Program yourself to experience the reward of the experience, no matter what's coming. My father used to say this, and people thought it was negative sometimes, but he would say to me, when I one of the big things, I was going to perform at Heinz Hall with Marvin Hamlish and the Pittsburgh Symphony. This was a long time ago. He said, be prepared for the worst. All right. So what does that mean? He could have stopped at be prepared. Period. Anything could be incoming. Like what if, as a performing artist, traveling all over the world, performing thousands and thousands of times, every situation is not optimal. Sometimes your flight was delayed, or you just roll in, like come sliding into the gig. I try not to do that, but sometimes things are beyond my control. Just because that didn't go as planned doesn't mean when I get there, I'm still not going to execute. None of those things matter. What matters is I am the variable, but I'm the constant in this equation. I am the one. I'm the constant. You have to be that. I'm the constant in this situation, and I know what I'll do. I'm always going to be great. No matter what, I'm going to show up and give 100%. And that's going to look different days. But generally, my 100% is pretty good. And so is yours. That's what I want to say. So is yours. That thing that you've got. And if it doesn't go that way, it doesn't mean it's not going to go that way every single time. Don't associate a negative experience with, positive propositions that come up later to do it differently. So don't take yourself out of the game, until the game takes you out of it itself. And that's the infinite. You're in it until you're not. Yeah. And it's not even in it to win it. You're in it to just begin it, like experience the joy and this reprogramming. So previous research has shown that imagining an act can activate and strengthen the regions of the brain involved in its real life execution, improving performance. For example, I think I've told you that story about pianos. We have 2 groups of people who are going to learn how to play the piano, and this group actually gets a piano, and this group pretends to have a piano. And in fact, the outcomes of the people who pretended to actually have the piano, when they actually got on a real piano, they executed more perfectly, more accurately, more often, because they didn't imagine themselves making mistakes all over the place. When your real experience is like, God, and you get the reinforcement of hitting that sour note, you know what I'm talking about. No, it goes right through some people's bodies like mine. They don't get that. They just heard it and felt it correctly all the time. So imagination. The new study suggests that imagination may be a more powerful tool than previously believed for updating memories, updating positive. Research also shows it's possible to update our memories, inserting new details. Update your memory, inserting new details. So the question is, which new details would you like to insert into some of the memories that could be a little crippling for you right now or challenging? I'm just going to update my memory here, and I'm going to include this little thing, this detail, to improve your experience of life. Where do you want to go with that? Every one of us is going someplace different in our minds right now and in our imaginations and our experiences. Each one of you is experiencing this wonderful, fabulous SoulCall opportunity in a different way. But we're here because we love it. So they say if you have a memory that is no longer useful for you or is crippling you, you can use imagination to tap into it, change it, and reconsolidate it. updating the way you think about and experience something. So stressing that something as simple as imagining a single tone tapped into a complex network of brain circuits, like what they were talking about, like this single tone associated with a little shot, that could wreak havoc on people. But like other things are a little more stimulating because we've given them so much meaning now. Sometimes our biggest thing is to imagine what it would feel like if I didn't make this mean so much. I can't imagine not letting these things people say to me upset me. I can't imagine. Imagine it. Insert that new detail. Well, I can all of a sudden, I can imagine like sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. And you know what? I don't care what you think. Imagine yourself not caring. I don't care what you think. You always say negative things to me. Why do I care? Disconnect that. My updated memory is, oh, they say this, this, and this, and you know what? I really don't care. Who cares? Think about it. It doesn't make you callous. It makes you, conscious. Right? Pearls before swine. It's in all these different things. Non-attachment from the Buddha. Practice not being attached or connecting things that can be perpetually uncomfortable. Leave them alone. I revisit foods. It's always going to get back to food. Sometimes I didn't think I liked sweet and sour. Everybody collective, what's wrong with you? Well, but it turns out I don't like bad sweet and sour. I love sweet and sour. I didn't realize I did because what I was exposed to. So I had a negative, somebody says sweet and sour, I'd be like, no, thank you. No. One or the other, figure it out. But now I really like it because I had it prepared properly. So like every several years, I would try things I didn't think I liked from places when I started to travel more and realize, yeah, when people say you don't get seafood at a steakhouse, you probably could, but you know what I'm saying. You don't go to a Chinese restaurant and order spaghetti and meatballs. You could, but I'd rather go somewhere else, All right, so you get the point. Insert something new. This researcher said that there was much more variance in brain activity in the group than imagined versus the ones who really heard it, suggesting that those with a more vivid imagination may experience greater brain changes when simulating something in their mind's eye. So how many of you think you have an active imagination? That could work for you or against you, depending on if you have an active imagination. Insert these new details to make sure you're always grooving on the thing that supports your higher functioning and your joy factor, right? Do it. They didn't call me back. What does that mean? I know it. I'm not gonna get the job. But it might just be they had to wait for one more person, or they were trying to make sure this person was on the call so that they could all tell you as a group, you crushed it. We love you. We think you're amazing. Right? They might be fighting over who gets to tell you the great news. Like, imagine it that way. And if something, doesn't line up the way you thought it would, just, I was taught a long time ago to just say prayers like, not as a beggar. We're not mortal beggars, Yogananda says. Like, say it with conviction. When you pray, the world must shake. Shake it up with your prayers and know that it's right for you to have. And if it doesn't look like this, that means the universe is conspiring for my good right now. And something even more amazing is going to blow my mind shortly. Anytime now. Right? Just like, okay, so it wasn't there. I thought this was it. But apparently the universe, okay, what do you got? What have you done for me lately? Like, what do you got for me? So manage your imagination and what you permit yourself to imagine. You can use imagination constructively to shape what your brain learns from experience. So I like that as the closing. Manage your imagination and what you permit yourself to imagine. Right now, I imagine most of you are thinking we're going to close with, imagine that. No, we're not. We are going to close with a wonderful song called Nothing Happens Without You from Rumi. I could have never imagined. Think of the things that just came together for you in ways you could have never imagined. Everybody have at least 1 or 2 or 5 or 10, right? I could have never imagined 10 years ago that love, or yesterday. I could have never, the way that thing lined up, I could have never imagined it. Allow yourself to leave the door of your imagination open to the infinite, that little part of the brain that they talked about early, that kind of is partitioned off. That's where the imagination, invite the infinite into that room. And let that infinite mind, for positivity, for good, for your joy, the infinite wants to mostly express joy and love and light. Let that hold the supreme throne in that room of imagination. It's the infinite. It's God's great pleasure to give us the kingdom. And allow yourself to run wild with fantastical imaginations. Crazy good fun, like being turned loose in the yard. I mean, we turned into everything in our backyard. We were this for an hour, and then we did that. Then we were the greatest whatevers when we were kids. Like, I am, like, the great and powerful Oz. That was all imagination. He imagined himself to be, and he pulled it off. But what can you do? What do you imagine to bring you into that space of infinity where you cosmically create your version of reality? Because it's all an imagination, and this is all a cosmic dream. Yogananda says, awaken the cosmic dream. So my deepest wish for you is to remember that nothing happens outside of the realm of the infinite's watchful gaze and loving energy. So imagine this world is for you, and everything in it takes part in the play to bring you to the awareness of divine realization that the earth is a place of love. On Earth Day, it is the most abundant, joyful experience on the planet. And the more we imagine this, the more we do our part to be the example of this thing. Peace and many blessings, and enjoy this song. Nothing happens without you.